On this episode of China Uncensored, pre-trade war trash talk is over. Now, China and the US are in the ring, and all they're going to be trading is blows. Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. Well, we told you so. As far back as January of 2017. How likely is it that Trump is going to impose tariffs on China?
Oh, he's definitely going to do it.
Really?
100%.
And last Friday, Trump did it. In a White House statement, Trump said that the U.S. would implement a 25% tariff on $50 billion of goods from China that contain industrially significant technologies. On the same day, the Office of the United States Trade Representative, the agency responsible for implementing the tariffs, issued a news release. It was helpfully titled, USTR issues tariffs on Chinese products in response to unfair trade practices. Just in case people thought they might be issuing tariffs in response to, I don't know, that terrible Chinese movie Operation Red Sea. With the announcement, the U.S. Trade Representative published a long list of 1,102 products that will be hit with tariffs starting July 6th. That list includes stuff we all use every day, like can sealing machines, centrifuges, and klystron tubes? Wait, what's that, Shelley? The tariffs don't include consumer goods like mobile phones and TVs? Well, that's great news. Looks like American consumers will still be able to enjoy Walmart's everyday low prices and Walmart's everyday low standards for Chinese suppliers. But just because the new tariffs don't cover consumer goods doesn't mean they're not a big deal for both countries. Most of the goods on the tariff list are related to China's Made in China 2025 strategic plan to dominate high-tech industries like robotics, aerospace, and industrial machinery. The Made in China 2025 plan is designed to drive future economic growth for China, in large measure at the expense of the U.S. And a lot of these products were made after China stole American technology. In some cases, the Chinese military simply hacked in, stole it, and gave it to local Chinese firms. In other cases, it was because of a Chinese law that U.S. companies doing business in China were required to set up joint ventures with Chinese firms and then hand over their intellectual property. That's why, when announcing the tariffs, Trump said the U.S. can no longer tolerate losing our technology and intellectual property through unfair economic practices. One thing Trump hopes to achieve with the tariffs is to force China to change parts of its state-led economic system that put foreign companies at a disadvantage. But with Friday's publication of the tariff list, Chinese state media got seriously triggered. An editorial in the Communist Party's official People's Daily said the U.S. was instigating a trade war and that it would be extremely destructive to global trade, economic globalization, multilateral trade systems, and global production supply chains. State-run Xinhua News said the wise man builds bridges, the fool builds walls. Anyway, state-run CCTV announced that China would fight back.
China has no choice but to fight back strongly to resolutely protect its national interests and the people's interests, and to resolutely defend globalization and the multilateral trading system. We will immediately publish levies of the same scale and same strength.
And they did. China announced essentially tit-for-tat tariffs, also worth $50 billion, some of which are also going into effect starting July 6th. China's tariff list on U.S. goods includes soybeans, beef, and whiskey. There goes my plan for opening a tofu steakhouse/whiskey bar in downtown Beijing. But is a trade war really going to be as destructive as China is making it out to be? Well, probably not for the U.S. Experts say economic growth in the U.S. won't be affected all that much. Rich Sega, global chief investment strategist at Conning, says Chinese tariffs won't be enough to derail strong growth in the U.S. because lower taxes and deregulation outweigh trade. As for China, this could be a big hit to their Made in China 2025 plan. And that doesn't even include the additional $100 billion in tariffs that Trump has threatened. What's that, Shelley? Trump just announced a possible additional $200 billion in tariffs? It's a good thing China can always just fake its GDP data. What's interesting about the $200 billion number is that China doesn't import that much from the US. So while China can match a $50 billion tariff, they can't match a $200 billion one. What they could do instead is go after US companies in China and make it harder for them to continue manufacturing and doing business there. But if American companies all leave China, who would the Communist Party steal technology from? The Chinese regime's rhetoric against US tariffs is hitting a fever pitch because if we do ever reach an all-out trade war, China is at a disadvantage. Typically in a trade conflict, the side that exports the most stuff has the most to lose. However, some analysts think that China could withstand a trade war better than most exporters since they don't have to worry about things like elections or public pressure, and they control their own media. I guess there are some benefits to being an authoritarian state. But regardless of what happens, there's one clear winner. Me! Nothing gives the media delicious fodder like international conflict, especially when it involves klystron tubes. Okay, so maybe it's not going to be that interesting. But what do you think? Leave your comments below. And before you go, it's time for me to answer another question from a China Uncensored fan on Patreon. Ivan A. asks, do you think all Western liberal democracies shoulder much of the blame for China's continual terrible human rights record by their reluctance to apply ethical foreign policies over the last 20 years? Great question, Ivan. I'll put it this way. Back in the 90s, US President Bill Clinton and a lot of other countries' leaders pushed to allow China to get into the World Trade Organization. The idea was, they told us, that sure, there are bad things in China, but if China opens up its markets, then democracy and human rights will follow. Doesn't that sound wonderful? But if that was really their main motivation to open up trade with China, then why weren't those same politicians also pitching to open up trade with Cuba and North Korea? Oh wait, those countries don't have 1 billion potential customers. So basically, rich companies and powerful politicians were willing to look the other way when it came to the Communist Party throwing Falun Gong practitioners into labor camps in exchange for access to that sweet, sweet China market. Wait, how did politicians defend that again?
I don't believe that we will have more influence on China by giving them the back of our hand.
Yeah, and how did that work out? So are Western liberal democracies to blame? Yeah, for sure. But the Chinese Communist Party is even more to blame. They're the ones that are actually throwing innocent people in labor camps. They took advantage of foreigners' greed to grow China's economy. Without foreign investment, the party would have collapsed a long time ago. But with all the intellectual property theft, the Western liberal democracies got their just desserts for exploiting unfairly cheap Chinese labor. The party came out on top. Of course, now there's trade tariffs designed to tackle unfair trade practices, and those could hurt both the Chinese Communist Party and greedy foreign companies. But if the tariffs work the way the White House believes they will, that may change things for the better in the long run. I guess you'll have to keep watching China Uncensored to see what happens. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. At the end of most episodes, I answer a question from fans who support China Uncensored on the crowdfunding website Patreon. Click this orange button, contribute $1 or more per episode. Not only will you be helping us keep China Uncensored going, but also I might answer your question on the next episode.